When the internet began, bulletin board services, or BBS, became the first online communities of the so-called information superhighway. Using their phone lines, people logged in from all over America to talk about sports, games, movies, and on one BBS in particular, share their ghost stories. Over time, those communities all went dark, except for one lone server that continues to operate somewhere in an unknown part of Pennsylvania's Rust Belt. A relic of the 1990s, veiled in mystery, it is a digital archive of humanity's strangest encounters with the unknown, as told by the people who experienced them. My name is Brandon Schexnayder, and you are listening to Fear Daily.
Subject: White Candle. User: OB23. Posted April 2nd, 1998.
Being famous isn't all it's cracked up to be. In fact, I'd go so far as to say that being famous is a BS dream sold by record labels to schmucks like me so we don't think about why we're not getting rich. If spending the first half of my life in the music industry has taught me anything, it's that. You'd probably know my music if I told you. I was part of a group that had a few big singles, then I went off to do my own thing, and that went pretty well for a while too. The kind of music we made fell out of vogue in the late 80s, and sales went straight off a cliff. To try and move units, my label had me doing shows at shopping malls across the Midwest. When you've got bills to pay, no gig is too small, so I threw myself into those things heart and soul. It wasn't as bad as you might think. Folks are grateful to see you in a way you don't get on either coast, and the women were very friendly. That's where I got in trouble and where I met the witch. Understand that I don't mean that in the pejorative sense. She was an actual witch and told me as much. After everything, my shaman Wanda eventually called me an idiot for not asking follow-up questions, but this girl was gorgeous, at least from Minnesota, and not all of my blood was available for thinking at the time, if you catch my drift. Her name was Miranda, and I'd seen her in the audience during my set. There was something magnetic about her, a pull I'd never experienced from an audience member before. It was more than her looks or her long copper braids or the way she filled out her white blouse. It really was magnetism, or what I thought at the time. After shows like that, it's common for the audience to wait for you to sign autographs. I don't mind doing it. After all, without them, I'd be scrambling to pay my mortgage the way my old bandmates are now, and sometimes maybe you make a special friend who wants to show you the city. That day after my set at the Mall of America, there were a couple Midwestern princesses who wanted to be my tour guide. Such are the perks of low-level fame. In the end, it was Miranda I found myself talking to, and Miranda who came back to the bus so we could talk more about making music. Let me tell you, when it came to making music, she didn't need any help from me. Afterwards, I felt like my brains had been blasted out the back of my head. She probably could have asked me for a car and I'd have given it to her. Instead, all she wanted was to leave behind a candle for me. Ordinarily, I don't like taking gifts from people. It creates a sense of obligation. For Miranda, though, who I was increasingly certain was some kind of lowland goddess, I made an exception. She got extra brownie points from me for not hanging around too long afterwards, leaving a fat white candle on the little dressing table next to my bed before giving me a kiss goodbye. An hour later, we were back on the road, and my foxy little witch was a memory. A month later, after the tour, I was at home in the canyon unpacking all my gear. There, at the bottom of my bag, was the same white candle, and it genuinely took me a few minutes to place where it had come from. I had no memory of taking it with me. Like I said, I don't like gifts, and you never know when you're going to have a woman over. Women expect certain things to be in a single man's house, and if she sees something outside her expectations, questions are asked. Still, I figured the candle was here now. Why not put it in the bedroom? Maybe my next playdate'll assume I wanted to set a mood. That night is when I began hearing her voice. I was in bed just about to drift off when I became vaguely aware of chanting. I lay there, the voice of a woman washing over me, keeping me on the knife edge of wakefulness. Soon, my body went to sleep, but my mind couldn't, as if the voice, now unmistakably Miranda's, was tugging it back like a fishhook. I could hear her as plain as day, even if the words sounded like nonsense. Soon, I could also see her in my mind's eye. She was in front of some kind of standing stone, maybe in the backyard somewhere. I could make out faint glimpses of a house's back porch and a tall wooden fence. Dipping her fingers into a bowl of red mixture, she then used them to paint symbols on the stone. As she did, my mind began to simultaneously feel tethered to her while drifting off to sleep, like a helium balloon on a string, the other end tied around her waist. In the morning, I dismissed the whole experience as a dream. When it happened again every night that week, however, it got harder to ignore. I really thought I was cracking up, and for some reason the thought that I should just go talk to Wanda never occurred to me. I mean, what's the point of living in LA and having a shaman of your own if you don't consult her, right? If it hadn't been for Donnie, I'm not sure that would have happened. Donnie's my agent, a real pit bull type who refuses to let my career die. Bless him. He came over that Friday with a bottle of Johnny Walker Blue, and once work was done, we dove right in. I didn't mention the dreams or what I thought were dreams. He's my agent, after all, not my friend. Sometimes, when we hit the bottom of the bottle, we call it a night. Other times, I pull the Stoli out of the freezer and we go for the gold. That night, we went for it, and Donnie got so bombed that even he couldn't drive home. He passed out on the sofa at some point, after which I stumbled to my bedroom, not even bothering to get undressed before hitting the pillow. For some reason, maybe the booze, I didn't hear Miranda's voice right away. When it did finally penetrate the fog, it manifested as part of the dream, like a sitcom's guest star they forgot to announce in the opening credits. Her chanting was so loud and my alcohol-soaked sleep so thin that I was pulled back to wakefulness. For the first time since all this started, I was able to hear her while having full control of my arms and legs. It was as if she was in the room with me. While my brain was processing this through a grain alcohol haze, Donnie's voice broke in, heavy with sleep and slurring slightly. He wanted to know where the music was coming from and why I had it up so loud, goddammit. The shock of him being able to hear it too rendered me totally speechless. My agent has never been the kind of guy to stand on ceremony, so he stumbled right into my room without knocking, going straight toward the white candle on my dresser. I watched as he picked it up, frowned at it, and put it to his ear. He gave a sort of humph sound and wobbled toward my unsweet door, swaying as he went. Miranda's chanting seemed to go with him, reducing in volume the further he and the candle got from me. I followed him into the bathroom just in time to see him pitch the unlit candle into the tub. Then, for reasons I will never understand, he dropped his pants and just, man, I don't know how else to say this. He pissed all over it. A lot. And you know what? the chanting stopped just like that. No more Miranda, no nothing. Just the sound of a middle-aged man relieving himself in my jacuzzi tub. When he was finally done, he nodded decisively and lay down in the middle of the floor before passing back out. As for me, I went back to bed and lay there in the quiet. I must have passed out at some point because when I opened my eyes again, it was 3 in the afternoon and my head felt like elves were trying to jackhammer their way out. When I went into the bathroom, Donnie was gone. The only evidence had ever been there a small pile of vomit and, yes, one piss-soaked candle. I decided to leave both for the maid. Hey, I'm a rock star. I don't clean up my own vomit, never mind other people's. None of this made sense until Monday when I visited Wanda at her place in the Hollywood Hills. She has a pink 3-story concrete house with one hell of a view, and if you think having a house like that is incongruous with her being a shaman, then you don't know LA. I told her the whole story from the mall show to the candle to the bathtub. The entire time I was waiting for her to react in some way, maybe an open mouth or even a raised eyebrow, and yet she never did. At the end, she just nodded and agreed that was magic, all right. She said that Miranda had very likely enchanted the object in such a way that it needed to be somewhere strongly connected to me before it could reach back to her. She also believed that the point of the exercise was full-on bewitchment, meaning Miranda was trying to make me fall in love with her. It's silly when you think about it, considering all should already more or less done, everything should need to make me fall in love with her. A couple more rolls in the sack like that, and I'd have been ring shopping for sure. That left one big question. What made it all stop? A smile broke out on her face, and she winked. You know what her answer was, dear reader. It was the piss. Using urine to break a spell, Wanda said, was truly ancient magic. My agent and drinking buddy had broken the spell through the simple act of being a gross dick who didn't respect other people's property. I'd never tell him, and even if I did, it's unlikely he'd believe me or care. Still, I'll never again complain about paying that man his 10%.
Subject, Ego Sum Papa. User, IHFaith92. Posted, December 27, 1998.
My faith was broken on a day that was meant to affirm it. The trip of a lifetime, I told everyone who would listen, a trip for which I had spent years saving. For the first time in my life, I would be getting on an airplane, and also for the first time in my life, visiting another country. Not just any country, though. The Holy See itself, the Vatican. Born to Catholic parents, baptized and confirmed, I was finally going to see my religious homeland, and I couldn't have been more thrilled. Not only that, the Lord had seen fit to grace me with a ticket to His Holiness's midnight mass on Christmas. This was 10 years ago in December 1988. I flew on Air Italia from here to Rome with a stopover in Paris. It had only been 8 years since Atavia Flight 870 crashed into the Tyrrhenian Sea and 3 since the bombing at Rome's airport. Facts my co-workers had pointed out with some glee, but nothing could dampen my enthusiasm for the adventure ahead. Not the uncomfortable flight, nor the crush of cab drivers trying to get my attention once I stumbled, sleep-deprived, out of the terminal. Not even the low brown smog that almost blotted out the sun. The travel agent had set everything up for me, the flights, my ride into the city, and the room at Hotel Teatro de Pompeo. Pompeo was built on the foundations of the Theater of Pompeii, where Julius Caesar was assassinated. I was staying right atop the kind of history I'd only read about before in school. I was so excited. My room was lovely with high ceilings, terracotta floors, and a comfortable maplewood bed. Anyone can attend midnight mass in St. Peter's Basilica so long as you get tickets. They're free, you just have to request them months in advance. In addition to handling everything else, my travel agent sent a request on my behalf for a single ticket. Finding out it had been granted was the best day of my life up to that point, eclipsed only by the day I was finally able to go and pick them up from the Vatican. Rome itself, with its grit and grime, or the swallow-faced young men using magnets on string to fish for coins in the Trevi Fountain, proved to be a bit of a letdown. The Vatican, however, was everything I dreamed and better. Because both my parents were Italian and I was taught the language from an early age, the elderly nuns manning the office where I picked up my ticket thought I was a local, which absolutely made my day. I couldn't bring myself to correct them and resolved to include the moment in my next confession. It's also comical to think of it now. I'll spare the details except to say that I spent the days leading up to Christmas exploring both the Vatican and Rome itself. My hotel was a short walk away from an adorable little grocery store where I got to experience the joys of the Mediterranean diet. Those are the things I carry forward with me for comfort, the little things. The hotel had arranged a taxi to take me to St. Peter's Square for 6 p.m. Mass was scheduled to begin at 9:15, but I had been told in order to get a seat inside, even with a ticket, you needed to arrive hours in advance. The Swiss Guard had cordoned off the whole of the square and were checking everyone who wanted to pass through. The man who checked my papers was tall and broad, with the wide-set jaw of someone who had been in his fair share of fights. He was polite, though, validating my ticket before ushering me into the square itself. From there, I spotted the basilica's cupola and began to move that direction. My anticipation was off the charts. It was truly impossible to describe, every one of my dreams coming true. It was cold that night, maybe 40 degrees, and I had dressed accordingly, wearing my heavy winter coat over pressed slacks and a starched button-up. Growing up in New York, I was no stranger to crowds. If I had been, the process of filing into the church itself might have been challenging. People were pressed right up against your back, and you were just as squished into the people ahead of you. When I finally found a seat, mid-row at the back, I let out a sigh and sank into it. Everywhere I was surrounded by what seemed then to be the true might and majesty of my church, the center of its beating heart. As the hours ticked past, my own heart fluttered in anticipation. At 9:15, the procession entered and organs began to play. It was really happening. I crossed myself in joy and waited for the arrival of Holy Father John Paul II. I was not prepared for what came with him. His Holiness wore vestments of gold and white and shone like a beacon at the front of the basilica. It hardly mattered, though, because behind him was something else entirely. Something I first believed to be part of the ceremony, despite my ever having heard of it nor seen photographs. It was a stag, standing erect like a man, its eyes and antlers burning with fire that cast no light nor gave off smoke. To look upon it was to feel a crushing sensation in the chest and temples, as if simply perceiving it taxed your body and mind. What was going on? I wondered. Who was that man, and why did no one else seem to notice him? Again, I tried to tell myself it was all part of the mask, to look past it no matter how sinister it seemed. As the Holy Father spoke of love and acceptance in the word of Jesus, the stag behind him grew in size, defying the laws of reality in an unholy display of power. From 6 feet, it grew to 10, to 20, to 30, a pagan giant, its flames rising yet further. The stag's fiery head swiveled from left to right, surveying the crowd. The air around it seemed to shimmer, and still no one reacted. A cold sweat prickled all over my body as I desperately tried to remain calm. I could no longer even pretend to listen to the homily. All sound coalesced into a single high whine. My throat felt coarse and scratchy, windpipe narrowing to a thin, whistling tube. Why wasn't anyone saying something? His holiness was dwarfed by the terrible beast behind him. I had to say something, to do something. The Pope had to be protected, didn't he? The stag's fiery eyes stopped scanning the crowd, fixing upon my side of the church, upon me. The overwhelming panic I had been feeling was nothing compared to being the singular focus of something so incomprehensible. Pressure bore down on me, so intense I thought my body would collapse. It spoke my name, not my ears, no. Nothing so merciful as that. The stag spoke to me inside my head and my heart, in deep places I once reserved only for prayer. Thomas. I could barely draw breath. I was sure I would die. You are blessed, Thomas. You see, not many do. Your prayers die in my belly. I grow fat on your hope. Ego sum papa, Thomas. Ego sum ecclesia. A rancid laugh filled every corner of my body and soul, threatening to tear my mind apart. In that moment, I knew my God was absent, because had he been there, I surely would have been granted oblivion or madness. Instead, I was forced to watch as the stag wrapped itself around the man I had once thought the most holy on earth. The stag was absorbed, and my faith was forever broken.
Fear Daily is an independent podcast hosted by Brandon Schexnayder and written by Brennan Storr, with Joanna Smith serving as the consulting editor, audio production by Rachel Boyd, and sound design by Southern Gothic Media. This podcast is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places, and incidents are either products of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or to real events or locations, is entirely coincidental. Ad-free versions of Fear Daily are available now on your favorite podcast apps. For more information, visit feardaily.com. But move fast, before the server goes offline.